been suggested that you were one of the people tweeting that, and apparently there's no factual evidence for that at all. I mean, if you're going to tell me that there is, that's fine.
I don't have to tell you anything, and I don't really think I want to be invited on to this.
Fresh questions are being raised this week over the relationship between Meghan Markle and royal author Omid Scobie, following comments made live on British television that have reignited long-standing suspicions about behind-the-scenes media influence. The remarks, delivered unexpectedly during a Channel 5 broadcast, have prompted renewed scrutiny of how narratives surrounding the Duke and Duchess of Sussex may have been shaped within sections of the British mainstream media. At the center of the controversy is a statement made by veteran broadcaster Vanessa Feltz, who revealed on air that Omid Scobie had previously contacted her to praise her coverage of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, adding that Meghan herself had been delighted with how the couple was portrayed. The admission, brief but striking, has become a focal point for commentators who argue it lends weight to claims that Scobie acted as an informal intermediary between the Sussexes and media figures. Omid Scobie, a longtime royal correspondent and author known for his sympathetic coverage of the has often denied operating as a spokesperson for the couple. However, critics have repeatedly pointed to his consistent access, tone, and framing as evidence of a closer working relationship than publicly acknowledged. The latest revelation has intensified those claims, particularly given the context in which it was shared, a live call-in segment that appeared unscripted. Observers note that this disclosure is especially sensitive given its timing. The remarks reportedly relate to the period shortly after the death of Queen Elizabeth II, a moment when public expectations around restraint, neutrality, and respect were at their highest. Any suggestion that media messaging was being actively curated during that time has drawn strong reactions from royal analysts and viewers alike. The controversy has also reopened discussion about the treatment of dissenting voices within royal commentary. Several journalists and biographers who have been openly critical of Harry and Meghan have, over the years, found themselves challenged aggressively on air or sidelined in discussions. Supporters of those commentators argue that the pattern points to an imbalance in how perspectives were managed, particularly during the height of public debate surrounding the Sussexes' departure from royal duties. Vanessa Feltz's role has come under particular examination. Once perceived as broadly neutral, her on-air clarification appeared to signal sensitivity around accusations of bias. Media analysts suggest that the speed and intensity with which she defended her record may reflect the pressures broadcasters face when navigating polarized royal coverage. Meanwhile, Omid Scobie has returned to the spotlight this week for separate reasons, including the promotion of a new fictional novel set within a palace press office, a premise that has itself fueled speculation about how much of his work, fiction or otherwise, draws from real-world access and insight. Neither Meghan Markle nor Omid Scobie has responded publicly to the renewed allegations. However, the discussion has once again raised fundamental questions about transparency, journalistic independence, and the blurred lines between sources, subjects, and storytellers in modern royal reporting. As this story develops, it adds another chapter to the ongoing debate over how narratives around the Sussexes have been formed and whether the public has been seeing organic commentary or something more carefully managed behind the scenes. The on-air exchange that reignited debate around Meghan Markle's media influence unfolded in a manner that many broadcasters would describe as During a live Channel 5 segment, a caller praised the program for avoiding discussion of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, only to pivot immediately into commentary about them. It was this shift that prompted host Vanessa Feltz to respond defensively, a reaction that would soon take on wider significance. In clarifying her position, Feltz stated that she had never engaged in unfair criticism of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. To reinforce that point, she referenced a private message she said she had received from Omid Scobie, in which he reportedly described her coverage as incredibly balanced, adding that Meghan Markle herself had been pleased. While the remark may have been intended to establish impartiality, it instead raised new questions about communication channels between royal-adjacent figures and prominent media presenters. Media ethicists note that praise from sources closely associated with a subject can create the perception of editorial pressure, even if no explicit instructions are given. In this case, Scobie's name carries particular weight due to his reputation as a consistently sympathetic voice toward the suggestion that such feedback was shared and publicly cited has fueled speculation that positive reinforcement may have played a role in shaping tone across certain platforms. The incident also drew attention to a broader pattern observed by critics, that commentators perceived as favorable to Harry and Meghan often appear insulated from the confrontational questioning faced by more skeptical voices. Several royal biographers and journalists have recounted instances in which their appearances were disrupted or reframed when expressing critical views, leading to claims of uneven editorial treatment. Supporters of this interpretation argue that the dynamic creates a chilling effect, discouraging dissent in favor of safer, more agreeable narratives. In highly polarized royal coverage, even subtle cues, praise, access, or acknowledgement can influence which voices gain prominence. Vanessa Feltz's response on air was notable not only for what it revealed, but for how quickly she sought to distance herself from any suggestion of bias. Media analysts suggest that the urgency of her defense may reflect the reputational risks broadcasters faced when perceived as aligned with a particular faction in royal debates. In an era of heightened scrutiny, neutrality itself has become a contested claim. Meanwhile, Omid Scobie's role remains central to the discussion. Known for his close reporting on the Sussexes and his presence within royal press circles, Scobie has long rejected assertions that he acts on behalf of Meghan Markle or Prince Harry. Yet, critics point to moments such as this, where his private communications are invoked publicly as evidence of a more influential position than formally acknowledged. The timing of the revelation has further intensified interest, coming amid Scobie's renewed public visibility and ongoing reassessments of royal media relationships. The episode has prompted calls for greater transparency regarding how stories are sourced and framed. Viewers and readers alike are increasingly attuned to the mechanisms behind coverage, not just the content itself. For the renewed scrutiny arrives at a moment when public fatigue around royal disputes appears to be setting in. While devoted supporters continue to defend Meghan and Harry, polling and audience engagement suggests growing indifference among the broader public, a shift that may be more consequential than criticism. As discussion continues across broadcast, print, and digital platforms, the Channel 5 moment has become emblematic of a larger issue: the challenge of maintaining clear boundaries between subjects, sources, and storytellers in a media environment driven by access, personality, and perception. Whether the episode will lead to formal clarification or fade into the background remains to be seen. What is clear, however, is that a single unscripted comment has reopened long-standing questions about influence, independence, and credibility in royal reporting. Questions that are unlikely to disappear anytime soon. As scrutiny intensifies around Omid Scobie's media role, attention has increasingly shifted from isolated comments to broader patterns of influence. Critics argue that the issue is no longer about a single message or on-air remark, but about how sustained access, selective amplification, and informal validation can shape the wider media ecosystem surrounding high-profile figures like Meghan Markle. Omid Scobie has built his public profile as a royal journalist, with deep insight into the Sussex narrative. His proximity to the couple during pivotal moments, including their departure from royal duties and subsequent media projects, has long fueled debate over where reporting ends and advocacy begins. While Scobie has consistently maintained his independence, observers note that his framing often aligns closely with the Sussexes' public positions, raising questions about editorial distance. One of the most persistent criticisms centers on Scobie's interactions with broadcasters and commentators. Several media figures have acknowledged receiving praise or engagement from him when their coverage was perceived as fair or sympathetic. Media analysts argue that such interactions, even when informal, can act as subtle incentives. Positive reinforcement from a perceived insider may encourage consistency in tone, particularly in an industry where access and relevance are highly valued. The impact of this dynamic becomes more pronounced when contrasted with the treatment of critical voices. Journalists and authors who have expressed skepticism toward Meghan Markle and Prince Harry have reported facing public pushback, social media campaigns, or abrupt challenges during live broadcasts. While direct coordination is difficult to prove, critics argue that the asymmetry itself suggests an environment where favorable narratives are rewarded and dissent is discouraged. The discussion has also expanded to the role of fan communities and online advocacy. Supporter networks, often highly organized and vocal, have been accused of amplifying certain storylines while targeting critics. Scobie's social media presence, including past reposts and commentary, has been cited by detractors as contributing to this ecosystem, even if unintentionally. In this context, influence is less about direct instruction and more about momentum. Complicating matters further is Scobie's recent pivot toward fiction. His newly promoted novel, set within a palace press office, has drawn attention for its thinly veiled parallels to real-world events. While marketed as fiction, critics argue that such works can function as narrative extensions, allowing authors to advance interpretations without the constraints of nonfiction. Accountability. Publishing experts note that fiction, rooted in recognizable settings, carries its own ethical considerations, particularly when readers are primed to decode characters and scenarios as stand-ins for real individuals. This has led to renewed debate over whether such projects blur boundaries even further, reinforcing perceptions of alignment rather than distance. Throughout this renewed controversy, Meghan Markle has remained publicly silent. However, the discussion surrounding her alleged awareness of satisfaction with media coverage has fueled speculation about her engagement with narrative management. Supporters insist that being pleased with balanced reporting does not equate to directing coverage. Critics counter that repeated references to private approval suggest a level of involvement that warrants transparency. What emerges from these debates is a picture of modern royal media relations that is increasingly complex and informal. Influence no longer requires official press releases or spokespersons. It operates through networks, relationships, and perceived proximity. In such an environment, even offhand remarks can carry outsized significance. As the conversation continues, the focus is shifting from personalities to principles. Viewers are asking not just who said what, but how stories are shaped, validated, and sustained. The credibility of royal reporting, many argue, depends not on access, but on clearly defined boundaries. Boundaries that, in this case, appear to many observers to be under growing strain as the controversy widens. The focus is no longer confined to individual broadcasters or a single journalist's role. Instead, it has evolved into a broader examination of how modern media ecosystems can be influenced without formal coordination, contracts, or visible instructions. What makes this situation particularly striking is not the allegation of direct control, but the suggestion of an informal yet effective feedback loop between prominent figures, sympathetic intermediaries, and mainstream outlets. At the center of this debate is the idea of narrative validation. Media professionals acknowledge that affirmation from perceived insiders carries weight. When a well-connected commentator praises coverage as balanced or relays that a high-profile subject was pleased, that approval can subtly shape future editorial decisions. It does not require malice or intent. It relies on human psychology and professional incentives. In an industry driven by access, relevance, and visibility, even small signals can influence tone. This is why the recent on-air remarks referencing Meghan Markle's alleged satisfaction with coverage have resonated so strongly. Critics argue that such comments unintentionally reveal a behind-the-scenes dynamic rarely acknowledged publicly. The issue is not whether a public figure is allowed to approve or disapprove of coverage. That is inevitable, but whether journalists and presenters should treat such approval as meaningful currency. The fallout has also reignited discussion around the credibility of legacy media. Viewers increasingly question whether broadcasters are shaping narratives based on independent analysis or perceived alignment with influential figures and their networks. The erosion of trust does not occur overnight. It builds through moments that appear small in isolation but significant in accumulation. Parallel to this is the growing influence of online supporter groups. These communities operate with speed and coordination unmatched by traditional institutions. While officially unaffiliated, their actions often mirror broader narrative objectives, amplifying favorable stories, reframing criticism as bias, and applying pressure to dissenting voices. Media analysts note that when journalists anticipate backlash, even unconsciously, it can affect which stories are pursued and how forcefully. This environment places particular strain on commentators who challenge dominant narratives. Several high-profile critics have reported abrupt confrontations during live appearances, sudden shifts in booking practices, or heightened personal attacks online. Whether orchestrated or organic, the effect is the same: discouragement. In such a climate, silence can feel safer than scrutiny. The situation is further complicated by the commercialization of commentary. Speaking engagements, books, streaming content, and digital platforms have blurred the line between journalism and brand building. Figures who once operated primarily as reporters now function as personalities with audiences to maintain and products to sell. This does not invalidate their work, but it does introduce competing incentives. Omid Scobie's transition toward fiction has become emblematic of this shift. While fictional works are protected by creative freedom, critics argue that when stories are clearly inspired by real events and personalities, they can reinforce existing narratives under the guise of imagination. Fiction, in this context, becomes another vector of influence, less accountable, yet emotionally persuasive. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle's public-facing strategy continues to invite debate. Supporters view her as a figure unfairly targeted by hostile media, justifying efforts to correct or counter narratives. Critics argue that her approach reflects a desire not merely for fairness, but for control, a distinction that matters greatly in democratic media systems. The truth likely sits somewhere in between, but the lack of transparency fuels suspicion. What makes this moment pivotal is timing. Public trust in institutions, media included, is already fragile. Audiences are more media literate than ever, quick to detect inconsistencies and patterns. When broadcasters appear defensive, dismissive, or overly eager to prove neutrality, it can backfire, reinforcing the very doubts they seek to dispel. There is also a historical parallel at play. Royal reporting has long walked a tightrope between access and independence. In earlier eras, exclusives were traded for restraint. Today, the currency is different, but the principle remains. The question is whether modern journalism has developed adequate safeguards for influence that operates socially rather than contractually. Ultimately, this controversy is less about Meghan Markle or Omid Scobie as individuals and more about the systems surrounding them. It raises uncomfortable but necessary questions. Who shapes the narrative? Who benefits from certain portrayals? And how can audiences distinguish reporting from advocacy when the lines are increasingly blurred? As this story continues to unfold, one thing is clear. The public is no longer satisfied with assurances of balance or claims of independence. They want evidence, not of conspiracy, but of integrity. In an age where perception can be as powerful as fact, maintaining clear boundaries may be the only way for media institutions to preserve credibility. Whether this moment leads to reflection or retrenchment remains to be seen. But for viewers paying attention, the lesson is already clear. Influence